In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to master the race in F124, going over 5 easy to follow and easy to understand points on how I go about maximizing my performance when doing races in this game. With that being said, let's get into the heart of the video and straight into the action. As you can see, we're on COTA here today. The reason I picked COTA is it's one of the most challenging tracks on F124 and a fantastic track to go over my 5 points that are going to be adjusting a qualifying setup for a race pace setup and how you can go about that very easily and very efficiently. The second point is going to be using your battery over a lap and how to try and keep it level and how you can strategize yourself on to maximize the battery performance. The third one is going to be managing the tyre, but not making the tyre wear better, so to say, but really understanding to not let the rear deg get too high or not letting the front deg get too high in opposite contrast. The fourth one is going to be managing track limits and understanding where you want to be taking the risks and how you can be maximizing your performance while minimizing any chance of picking up unnecessary penalties during the race. The fifth and final one is a really underrated point that not a lot of people try to maximize, and that's going to be your pit entry and pit exit. So, with that being said now, those are the 5 points of the video that we're going to be covering today, and also we're going to be getting into the setup. This is a setup that I basically took from time trial and very lightly adjusted to be making it sort of usable for you at home as well. So basically a qualifying setup on COTA would normally be running like a 20 off-throttle differential, maybe 25, and generally you don't really want to be messing around with the rest of the balance, the anti-roll bars, the suspension, the ride height, quite simply as the qualifying setups in F124 are not that different from the racing setups. The biggest difference, to be honest, is just going to be that off-throttle differential, and in qualifying maybe running like 20, 25, and in the race you'll be bumping up your off-throttle differential by 5% to try and add a bit of stability into the rear axle, which will minimize the tyre scrubbing and as a result the rear tyre deg, and as the stint goes on and on and on, you're going to be finding the car to be easier to drive rather than sliding around and costing yourself a lot of confidence and lap time because of that. So that's going to be the first point. You always generally want to be adding 5% off-throttle differential to stabilize the car going from a qualifying setup to a racing setup. Apart from that, you don't really want to do anything else to the balance. Of course, on COTA, we're running pretty much max wings anyway, so that's something that you don't really need to do. A second point that you can do is going to be adding some front anti-roll bar into the car, what will just help stabilize it and bring a bit more understeer into the car, what will just make the car more easy to drive as the stint progresses. But 19 feels good. I basically did some laps on warm-up just to get the car balanced. So yeah, that's something that you can use at home. Going into the second point of the video, what is going to be using the battery in an efficient way over the lap. And basically the target that I'm going to be looking to do is firstly get away from the AI. Hello, Lando. Jesus, you've got a star and a half, haven't you? Basically, what you want to be doing is finding a battery usage strategy that allows you to be always ending the lap with the same amount of battery that you started it. That's the ideal situation, and that can allow you to have a really good baseline of performance to go on with. So always in the sort of corners that are like this in Sector 1 COTA, where you're just sort of flowing through them, you're not accelerating, but you're not really decelerating at equal situation. You just want to be going none on the battery. So every single corner, as we just actually go a bit deep on this corner, my apologies there, we're going to be a bit under pressure from the AI, but in a summary, every corner that is quite low speed, where you have to be off the power for, you basically want to be going to none, as we're going to try and hang it around the outside of Lando Norris. Lovely jubbly. You know, Lando's putting me under a bit of pressure here, and I need to step up the pace. But anyway, so any corner like this, you can see we're putting the car into none on the battery to harvest it a bit more and be a bit more efficient. I've changed my camera position now that esports is finished to the bottom left hand side of the screen, so you can always see what's happening on the bottom right hand side of the screen with my battery usage, my differential usage, my brake bias usage as well. And you can see that every single time I'm going into a corner, I'm putting the car to none and only going back out of none when we are confident on the traction. So going across the start finish line, we actually had 44%, I believe it was, going across the line. So you can see we're basically going to be making a strategy that every single time we are going into a corner, we put the battery to none. That means that we can harvest. And the strategy that I'm going to be doing with the overtake button is when we are on a straight that can give a big advantage to be using that extra power, we will be using it. Otherwise, a very effective way to do race pace on F124 is quite simply to be running medium on straights like this that are not particularly long. But then once you do get to a straight that is fairly long, and you could be using a bit of overtake button, then you can start using it up until like 7th gear, and that means you can get a nice boost of acceleration onto the straight. I reiterate my point that a really big and really critical factor in this sort of battery deployment strategy is always going to be trying to end the lap with the same amount of battery that you started it. So you can see down here, because the straight is quite small, and to be honest, the acceleration doesn't really matter on these little parts, I'm just spending a lot of time in none. I will flick it up to medium occasionally, just so I can make sure that I can get a good acceleration and not going to be vulnerable to the cars behind. But you can see coming into the final corners now, and what we started the lap on 44, we've got one more braking zone to go, and that means that we can go through the final apex, and we're going to actually be gaining 5%. We're going to gain about 5% on the battery usage over that lap, what means we can use 5% more overtake button, and like this I can start adapting my strategy going forward. So I think, okay, now I can use 5% extra, so I use 5% extra out of turn 1, but then the remainder of the lap is going to be the same strategy, what allows me to sort of build up a picture and a consistency in my mind. Like I say, the biggest factor here, and a really important factor in the whole grand scheme of racing with cars that have a battery pack in them, is quite simply understanding when you can use the overtake button or when it's better to be harvesting. Key point summary of the first point for this video is always use none when in the corners. When the straight is not really that important, you could be using the medium mode, and then when you have a long straight like we have here, you want to be using the overtake button for the allocation that you've saved up on the previous lap. So that allows you to build in your mind, basically to say, every single lap I have the ability to use overtake button for 6 seconds. And that means I know that I have 6 seconds of allocation of overtake button, and that allows me to always end the lap with the same amount of battery as I started it. So that just builds up a picture and allows you to form consistency around that very critical area of performance when racing on F124. So hopefully that first part of the video has been helpful for you. The second part of the video is going to be managing your tyre deg and the balance that actually happens around the tyre deg of the car. You can see right now we actually have 15 on the front tyre and 12 and 11 on the rear. The reason for that is that I've been too harsh on the front right tyre, and although yes, that front tyre is now going to be degging faster than the rest of the tyres, I am going to be putting my braking bias to the rear, so I actually minimize the front locking now and start putting more of the deg towards the rear of the car. The reason why that is very, very, very important is quite simply is if we get to a point, as we get a big snap of oversteer, for example, if that tyre gets to sort of a much bigger gap of tyre wear percentage compared to the rear tyres, I'm just going to end up with massive, massive, massive understeer as we go on during the stint. So this isn't about learning how to manage the tyre better. This quite simply is understanding to read the future patterns of car performance during the stint. So as this situation is unfolding, you're going to see that now we have 18 on the front right tyre, and what that is going to be doing as the gap is getting bigger and bigger between the front tyre and the rear tyre on its deg, and basically the front tyre is getting more tyre deg faster than the rear tyre, it's going to lead to more and more and more understeer as the stint progresses. So you really want to understand that and combat that during the stint, and that's one of the biggest things that I'm always watching during my racing stint, is trying to understand how I can minimize the downside of that front tire degging more and how I can try and keep the tyre deg as equal as possible during the stint. So how I will adjust my driving now to suit that is, again, I put the braking bias slightly more rearward so I have less chance of locking up the front tyre. As I've talked about in a previous video, if you lock up a front tyre, that is one of the easiest ways to add tyre deg to the tyre and will be very detrimental to performance over a stint. The second way I'm going to be doing that is when I'm turning high-speed left-handers, for example, in the first sector, I'm going to be purposely driving slower during that corner to try and minimize the stress on that front tyre. And basically the goal that you're going to be looking for is to try and have your front and rear tyres the same percentage of tyre wear. If you could do that, you're going to be in a very, very strong position going forward. Just to summarize that point about the tyre deg, because it's not the easiest to understand and it's quite a complex issue when trying to maximize performance during a racing stint. But yes, if you're in a situation that your front tyre or your rear tyre or any tyre in fact is degging higher than the other side of the car, you're going to end up in a situation that in the short term, to be honest, it's going to have minimal to no effect of the car over a qualifying lap. But over a racing stint, and as you get 10, 12, 15 laps into a stint on F124, you're going to start to feel catastrophic effects to the car balance, and it's going to really hurt what you can do with your performance going forward because of that. As you can see, because that front right tyre has now degged higher than the rear right, when I'm going through high-speed corners, it's very much understeering. With that being said, though, the opposite is also true. That if you have a car that is oversteering, when you get towards the end of the stint, the rear tyres are going to be diabolical and you're going to really suffer to get any traction, grip, confidence out of the car. So just keep that in mind. Going on into the fourth point of the video, that is going to be how to manage track limits. Track limits sounds like an obvious one, but there's actually a complex strategy on how to maximize them and to be using them to your advantage during the race. For example, you get 2 track limit warnings for free. You might as well use them to gain performance, right? So the third one is always going to lead to the penalty. So the third one is really what you want to avoid. But like, what you can do to maximize your performance during the race is understanding what corners are actually worth taking the risk to cut on and what corners are not. For example, the final corner here in Kota. It is not worth it at all to take a track limit warning there because it's even slower to be off the track in many cases. But the same is true for corner 1 and the same is true for a lot of sector 1. But as we get to the start of sector 2 and we go for the right left up the hill, there's actually a lot to be gaining by taking a risk over a track limit warning through there. So you can see here there's nothing to gain, so it's easily flat out. Nothing to gain for a track limit warning. And now through the left-hander, quite a lot to gain actually, because you can cut the corner and gain a lot of speed. Same through here. If you get this right, you can really maximize a lot of lap time potential, so it's worth actually going up to the limit of the track. And that's what my advice is for you in that situation. Is understand before the race even happens what corners you're willing to risk trying to get a track limit warning on, or basically trying to be clean or attack on. And if you can understand what corners are worth taking that risk for, it's going to allow you to be way more consistent going forward. For example, the end of the back straight, you can really cut this corner quite a lot. Now going into the replay camera, you can cut this corner quite a lot, even more than I did. You can see I cut it already massively on this example, and I still didn't get a track limit warning. So that's something for you to learn with at home and how you can maximize it. And I know that if I cut that corner on the end of the back straight, it's going to be a lot of lap time potential. So stop thinking of track limit warnings as this massively scary thing that you have to avoid at every single cost of your race, and start thinking about it as a strategical advantage on how you can maximize your performance rather than just being scared by them. Prime example here, final corner, a lot of lap time to be gained by taking a risk on track limits through here, so I might as well push them to the limit. So like I say, the start of sector 2 on Kota, Charles Leclerc's out of the race, unlucky. So the start of sector 2 here on Kota has a massive advantage to be right up against the limit of the track limits, and also the second to last corner here in Kota has a big advantage as well. So use them to your advantage. Don't just sit there and have no strategy about it. think on each track where you think you can be gaining the most advantage from taking the risk of the track limits, and then start pushing those corners, and do not take the risk of wasting your track limit warnings on corners that you are gaining no advantage on by pushing the limits. You can see here, just to wrap up the final point and summarize the point here for the fourth point of the video, then we'll move on to the fifth. You can see here, there's so much track to be using by going up to the limit of the white line that we're able to gain tenths of a second through here. But if we are basically just driving around the white line, here you easily throw away a 1/10.5 by going around this curve. So you really have to be on the limit of the white line here. And I think a 1/10.5, 2 tenths advantage for risking a track limit is very much worth it. Whereas if we go, to be honest, here on the hairpin, you're not even going to gain time by cutting this corner because you hit the bump on the inside, you can see, and it unsettles the car a little bit. So it'll be silly to waste my track limit invalidation on a corner that I'm not going to gain time. So, key point summary, think what corners will give you the advantage and what corners will not, and start pushing the corners that will give you advantage, and avoid wasting your warnings on corners that won't. So the final point of the video on how to master the race and maximize your performance on F1 24 is going to be around the pit entry and pit exit. So a lot of people don't really practice pit entries. They kind of just think, okay, well, it is what it is. But you can gain temps, and to someone who hasn't practiced it in a wet condition, you can even gain a second on them in the pit entry. So what you're going to be doing is understanding how you can maximize it. Again, for example, going over this red line here, you get instantly a 10-second... Cheers for the tutorial. Basically, you instantly get a 10-second penalty by cutting the red part of the track on the inside here. So I know this ahead of time, and I know if I'm going into a race, career mode, or league racing, or even F1 sim racing, I cannot cut the red part of the track because I'll get an instant penalty. But I do know I can put 2 wheels on the red. As long as I stay on the outside of the white line, I will be fine. Again, just doing that again to nail it a bit better as I kind of understeered wide. But you can see just slowing down the car, minimizing the distance, and I was able to maximize the pit entry here and was able to do a good job. Looking at this again in replay mode, I was literally only just able to keep the car in the track limit without getting the penalty, and this was almost a perfect pit entry. Comparing this line to someone who doesn't know about this and would basically be driving around, you can see how much slower it is to be driving the pit entry normally. And again, that is just going to be costing you a lot of lap time potential and maybe costing you the opportunity to be gaining places during the race. The final part of this is also going to be the pit exit. What's going to be quite self-explanatory and much easier to nail compared to the pit entry because you've got fresh tyres and it's just a bit easier overall. But you can see on Kota here, it's actually quite difficult. Hopefully we're going to get a clean air. We'll slow down initially, but yeah. Now you can see it's quite difficult because the track points out. So you can see we're going to be pointing the car outwards before turning into the apex. And this is only sort of practicing it, what allows you to master it to this level in detail. You can see basically because the corner 1 is so tight, we start pointing the car outwards as soon as possible, right on the limit of basically staying in the pit lane and not taking up an unnecessary warning or penalty because of that. So you can see we're right on the limit here and just maximizing every aspect we can. We open up the track as much as possible, then turn in for the first apex, and we're able to maximize the performance. Yeah, and now comparing the line to before, imagine we just stay tight on the corner. So you can see like this. Look how much worse this is, how much slower it is, and how much more compromised we are by keeping the car very, very tight. And just reiterating the point, you can see we get the warning because of the flashback, but you can see we didn't cross the white line. But you can see how much slower it is to be keeping the car tight. And now we're going to do one more time, pushing the car to the outside of the track before opening up the corner. And you're going to see just how much faster this is. So opening up the corner, and you can see carrying way more speed, get a much better exit, and we're back into the race. So that is the final point of the video, and to summarize it, practice your pit entry, practice your pit exit on how to maximize them, and don't just lose time in those areas of the track because it will come back to bite you and it will cost you performance going forward. So with that being said, those are my 5 points on how to master the race in F1 24, covering adjusting the setup to maximize performance even before the race starts, and how you can edit a qualifying setup to be good in the race. going and talking about how to use a battery strategy and how you want to be keeping the battery equal going over lap to lap, and that means you can understand the allocation of overtake button you can allow yourself on each given lap of the stint. The third point on how to manage the tyres and not let one side of the car get too high and compromise the balance as the stint goes on. The fourth point being managing track limits and understanding how to use them to your advantage rather than being scared of them and see them as something that's evil and something that's slowing you down, and maximizing your opportunity to be strong in that area of the race as well. The fifth and final point, covering the pit entry and pit exit, maximizing them in the ways that probably your rivals are not, and how you can be gaining free lap time over the race. So that has been the 5 steps on how I master the race on F124. If you have any more questions about this video, feel free to leave them down in the comments, and I'll do my best to reply to them and give extra information going forward. So, I've been Brendon Leigh, that's been Logan Sargent, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next live stream videos. Grazie Vazazzi. Can we get on the inside of Joe? Sorry, Joe. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Grazie Vazazzi. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.